I don't even like him. Third, he's probably running out of fuel soon, so God knows if he'll ever make it back here.
I'm back, bitches!
Ahem. It's been a while, so let me make sure I remember how to do this correctly. So, it's been 6 months, roughly, since my last video, and I gotta be honest, I lost my edge for a while. I didn't really have the energy or motivation to put stuff out, and I didn't want to put anything out that I personally wouldn't enjoy, so I would rather put out nothing than put out half-ass stuff that I don't even like. So, hopefully, all 17 of you can understand that and welcome me back with open arms. So, let's get into the latest video, and I'm still continuing with the content you all know and love. Someone is going to prove to me not just that God exists, but that he must exist. It is a necessity. I am very excited. Let's get into it.
In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you why God has to exist.
I mean, you haven't defined God yet, so I'm very curious how you're going to pull that off without a definition, but hey, you got the floor, man.
We can start by having you take a look around. Now, what do you see? You probably see a bunch of stuff.
As opposed to...
What else?
Okay, now think about that stuff.
Is it possible for me to look at that stuff and not already be thinking about it? You added this as an extra step, as if someone can look at something without thinking about it.
And it doesn't matter what kind of stuff you're looking at, this will work fine for anything that you can see. Now, I want you to ask yourself, did all of that stuff exist 50 years ago?
No.
Or 100 years ago?
No.
Or how about 1,000 years ago?
No.
Better yet, you could just ask yourself, was there a time when what you see now did not exist at some point in the past?
I'm sure you get the meme by now. In my current location, yes, and...
Everything that you can see, whether it be your phone, your couch, your dog, your house, a tree, the moon, the sun, the earth beneath your feet, it really doesn't matter. Everything that you can see didn't exist at some point.
Okay, but what if I see God? Then what? Or is it not possible for me to see God?
And the only reason that it exists now is because something caused it to start existing at some point in the past.
I'm not convinced that's the only reason that it exists. There are a variety of factors that go into the existence of something. It is a massive oversimplification to simply say A caused B and that's it. For example, if you consider events like parades, there are a lot of different causes that go into parades. It's not merely someone wanted a parade and then it happened. There's a lot of preparation, time, energy, effort, money, and resources that go into it, all of which are their own separate and distinct causes to the grand effect that is a parade.
So,
It's not that simple to say one thing necessarily must have caused one other thing. Also, it's worth noting that you as a Christian don't believe this because you believe none of this applies to God. And Jesus was on earth. People saw him both alive and then dead and then back from the dead, allegedly. Does that mean that Jesus, who is God, by the way, was not eternal? Does that invalidate God being eternal because Jesus was something we could see and therefore must have necessarily had a cause, which was himself, which if you open that Pandora's box, then you have to explain how there's nothing else in the universe that can cause itself except God when he wants to be his own son.
Now pick out just one thing out of all that stuff that you can see, and let's call that thing 1. If I were to ask you why thing 1 exists, you'd point to other things.
No, I wouldn't. First of all, you shouldn't presume what I'm going to do. You leave that decision up to me. Ask me a question. Don't tell me what my response is going to be to a question, because then it sounds like you're just making up a scenario rather than demonstrating a real life example. What I actually would do is ask, what do you mean? Why? If the question you're asking is, how did this thing come into existence? Depending on what it is, I might have enough knowledge to give you a basic demonstration or refer you to someone or something that can give you a basic demonstration. If you ask why, well, then I'll probably point to the myriad of factors that I was complaining about in the beginning of this video, coupled with some sort of pragmatic purpose. Very, very rarely do things tend to merely exist and have no pragmatic benefit or function. So the primary reason for most, if not all, man-made things is its pragmatism and its usefulness. As for non-man-made things, again, I can explain a how to you, but I can't explain a why. I'm not sure there even is a why. If you ask me why the sun exists, I can't give you an answer to that. I'm not convinced that there is a why the sun exists. I can explain how it exists. I can refer you to a scientist who studies astronomy, and they could tell you how, but I don't think anyone could tell you with some sort of validity why something exists. Because, like it or not, there isn't always an answer to every question that you ask. And there isn't always a why. This might be one of those circumstances. And I want to know how you determine that things even have a why. Why do you think things need a why as an explanation? Is a how not good enough of an explanation, or what?
Now, to keep it simple, out of those things, let's just consider one of them, and let's call that thing 2. Thing 2 came into existence because thing 3 exists, and thing 3 came into existence because of thing 4, and so on.
You do know that seeds don't come from water, right? You understand that. I presume that you understand that seeds do not become trees just because seeds exist. A lot of seeds don't necessarily become trees. They need other factors like water in order to help them grow. This is what I was complaining about before with this linear line of thinking, when in reality, cause and effect is much more of a branched out kind of thing instead of a straight line backwards.
Okay, now hold that thought for a moment, and let's move from thinking about existence to the color red.
Okay, fantastic. I didn't know we were talking about existence per se, but okay. What is the color red? Or what is your definition of the color red?
Picture a red flower. Now, there's a reason why that flower is red.
Okay, and how do you know that there's a reason that that flower is red?
The flower didn't have to be red. The flower could have been yellow, the flower could have been white, the flower could have been purple, but instead it's red.
How do you know that? I'm not convinced that it could have been anything other than what it was based on cause and effect. This is akin to saying that a tree could have just been a car. Could it have been? I'm not convinced that it could be. I'm not convinced that that flower could have been any other color any more than I'm convinced that it could have been any other object or thing. How do you know that the flower could have been any other color other than the color that it was? Especially given the circumstances. If the circumstances are exactly the same, how could it be anything other than what it is? If you do math and you add 2 plus 3, how could the answer ever be anything other than 5? And if you play out the exact same circumstances that happened to grow this flower, how could it turn out to be anything other than what it is?
The redness of the flower came from something else that gave it its redness.
Okay, how do you know that?
If something didn't give the flower its redness, then the flower wouldn't have been red.
Oh, that's not true. Nothing gave God its godness, and God is still God. So this clearly doesn't apply. As an individual who believes in God having qualities that are not given from any particular place, I don't see why this can't be applied to anything else. If God can just be things and have things without getting it from anywhere, why can't we say the same about other things?
Now, the important thing to remember is that the flower itself is not the same thing as redness.
Are you going to explain what redness is, or are you just going to assume that we know? Because you've lost me at this point because you stopped defining your terms. Not that you ever defined them to begin with. But what is redness? And then how can we tell that the flower is not that thing? A distinction that cannot be made if one does not properly understand what redness itself is. And one cannot understand what redness itself is without an example to refer to. Concepts, like red, are effectively meaningless if they do not have proper things to refer to, pragmatic physical objects that you can point to as examples. This is why you can't really explain the concept of the color red to a blind person who has always been blind. To someone who has never encountered color, to try to explain it to them without having any example to show them is impossible. And the same can be said of functionally any concept. If I introduce a concept to you, no matter how well I describe it, if neither you nor I can refer to anything in our experience, we can't have an understanding of it. At least I'm not convinced we can. If you think we can understand redness without ever referring to anything that is red, and you can describe it in a way that can be understood, please do, but I'm not convinced. And I feel the same way about God. I don't feel like you can explain God without any sort of example to refer to, especially if you put God in this category of it has none of the qualities that all of the other things have. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
Back to existence. Existence is kind of like the color red.
How exactly is existence kinda like the color red?
Now, it has redness, but it's not redness itself.
How, Sway?
Existence is something that the flower has, but the flower itself is not the same thing as existence.
When you say that the flower has existence, what do you mean? Because I know what I mean when I say a flower exists. I'm referring to its specific spatial and temporal location and orientation. But when you refer to existence existing, that's not what you mean at all. When you refer to redness existing, that's not what you mean at all. So when you talk about redness itself or existence itself, you are not talking about some spatio-temporal orientation. And therefore, I have no idea what you mean when you refer to existence existing.
It only has existence because something else gave it existence.
Again, that's not necessarily true in all cases because you believe that God exists and no one gave him that.
The flower wouldn't exist unless it got its existence from thing 2, and thing 2 wouldn't exist unless it got its existence from thing 3, and thing 3 wouldn't exist unless it got its existence from thing 4, and this goes on and on.
No, again, there are a myriad of things that cause a flower to exist, not just one specific thing. This linear thinking is really what's messing you up here and giving you an improper understanding of cause and effect as some linear thing that just goes forwards and backwards rather than a branch that goes all over the place. I would also like to point out that this is a thing you keep saying, but this isn't a thing that you've actually proved or demonstrated. You keep saying this thing has to have a cause, which is this other thing, which has to have a cause, which is this other thing, which has to have a cause, which is this other thing. You keep saying that, but you don't prove that. You don't demonstrate that that's true of everything. So far, at best, even being as generous and charitable as I can, all you've proven is that some things exist, and some of the things that exist get their existence from other things. Proving that some things get their existence from other things is not the same as proving that everything gets its existence from other things. And we, as far as our experience goes, can't say how the rules of the universe function on the other side of the universe for certain. We don't know if on some other planet things can just come into existence with no cause. We don't know if in another part of the universe things just have attributes that they don't gain from anywhere. We don't know these things. It is very much a leap in logic to take your experience of the planet Earth and apply that to the universe at large.
This is not only true for the flower, but this is true for every single thing that you can see right now.
Okay, prove it. Oh, you're not going to prove it. You're just going to say it, and then we're just going to move on. Okay, I guess.
All of the stuff that exists will eventually trace back all the way until we get to a final point that we can call the OE.
Can you prove that? Can you demonstrate that? Can you prove that everything traces back to an original existence? Spoilers, that's what the term he's referring to is.
OE as in original existence. Okay, better yet, let's just call it thing Z. Thing Z would be the starting point and the ultimate reason for why anything at all began to exist, or why anything exists right now.
The alphabet starts with A as its first thing, so why would Z be the first thing to cause all the other letters?
Now this leads to the next question. If the reason why anything exists is because it got its existence from something else, then what's the reason that thing Z exists?
Nothing. That's right.
In the case of thing Z, things are a little bit different because unlike everything else, we don't have anything else to point to because thing Z is the first thing to exist.
You still haven't proven that or demonstrated that. You just said it must be that way, but you aren't proving it must be that way. There is a distinction between your ideas and how you arrived at them. And we've gotten to the point in the video where you are not explaining how you arrived at your ideas, you're just throwing them out. You haven't demonstrated that this applies to everything, and if we want to be perfectly honest, you haven't demonstrated that this applies to anything. You still haven't demonstrated that the flower necessarily must have gotten its redness from somewhere else. And I'm not saying that that's not true. I'm saying you haven't proven it's true, which is what you should be doing in this video about proof.
Remember OE, original existence? In other words, you can't point to something that doesn't exist in order to show why thing Z exists, because obviously that doesn't make any sense.
Again, why would we need to point to something else? You haven't explained why we would need to point to something else as an explanation to begin with, let alone why it doesn't apply here.
Because thing Z didn't get its existence from anything else, then thing Z had to always have existed.
Nani? That doesn't make any sense. It didn't get its existence from anything else, therefore it always had to exist? How does that make sense at all? How are those two ideas even related in the slightest way? You have a thing that exists, and as far as you can tell, it didn't get its existence from anything else. And from that, you conclude that it always must have existed. First of all, if it always existed, then there was an always for which it existed in. There was an infinite span of time that this thing existed in. And that doesn't make sense if you later argue that this thing created time itself. The point that I'm making here is that you just sort of jump from it exists without having got its existence from other things, which you haven't proven, by the way, you just said, but it exists without having gotten its existence from anything else. And you've taken that and you just jump to, therefore it's eternal and always was. Whatever that even means.
So it would be impossible for anything to threaten its existence.
What does that have to do with anything? So it didn't get its existence from anything else, therefore nothing can threaten its existence? How are those two ideas related at all? My guy, you're jumping all over the place and you're not making any kind of sense at all. You just keep making points and jumping from point to point to point to point to point rather than explaining and elaborating a point in a way that anyone can understand.
Yeah, I don't want to appear ungrateful, but it could have been point A to point B, but instead it was point A, then point C, point B got fired for a bit, and then point A turned heel and started fight C. Then we added like 3 more points, and then B came back and A sort of switched around and became D, but then C funneled back.
Or to take it out of existence.
Second verse, same as the first. It can't be taken out of existence because it always existed, which doesn't make any sense, but okay.
In other words, thing Z is eternal. Thing Z would not have existence, thing Z would be existence.
Because it didn't get the existence from anywhere else, and that's the best idea you can come up with.
So what could thing Z be?
I'm not convinced that thing Z is anything or could be anything at all. And I don't know how you concluded that thing Z could be anything at all. But if we're just going to throw out a bunch of examples that we can't really prove or possibilities, thing Z could be eternal?
I guess.
But it could be an event. It could be an item or an object. It could be something material or immaterial that lacks consciousness of any sort. Or it could be a being. And I know which one you're going to go for, but I still don't know why.
Well, it can't be anything physical, because anything physical would have either began to exist, or it's possible for it to stop existing at some point.
Since when is that a condition of something being physical? Have you checked all the physical things ever and determined that this is necessarily a rule for physical things? Because I don't think you have. I think this is a conclusion that you made up because that's just how stuff on Earth works. Like I said, I'm not convinced that this is the case, and you haven't proven that that's the case. You've just said physical things must have begun to exist and or must be able to stop existing. But Jesus was a physical thing, and he was also God, and God is also eternal. So I don't see how any of this makes sense.
Also, while I'm complaining,
it's worth noting that as human beings, we can create fictional worlds, fictional universes, or virtual ones. We can create some level of time and space in which events and things allegedly occur. So if I create a video game that possesses time, That does not mean that I am outside of time and then created time in the video game. I can be within the bounds of time in my universe and then also create time in a separate universe. So how do you know that's not what happened here? How do you know we didn't get our space and time from somewhere else?
And because it isn't physical, it also would have to be beyond physical space.
Beyond physical space meaning what? I don't even understand how that makes sense. Why would it have to be beyond physical? God could easily become physical because that's what you believe he did with Jesus. So I fail to understand. And yes, this person is a Christian, by the way, which is why I keep bringing this up. But I don't understand how you play fast and loose with the rules, where you say, well, if it isn't physical, it would have to be beyond physical space, unless it decided it wanted to be its own son and become physical. Because
Wonder why in life strange things just happen, such as a man in a wig walking out of a shed when there's no need. Well, don't worry, these things are going down all over the world. So whether it's in a garden in a residential area or definitely just happens. If you're struggling with this or you need to help a loved one, please call us on 0800 Stuff Just Happens. Somebody is waiting for your call.
Similarly, it would never have begun to exist, and therefore it would have to be beyond time as well.
that doesn't make sense either. Like, eternity is a measurement of time. If you take away the concept of time, eternity doesn't mean anything because it only means something in that framework. If you take away the concept of quantification and numbers, infinity doesn't mean anything. Like, these things have to have frameworks under which they operate for us to understand them. I don't get this idea that, well, if it's eternal, then it must have existed before time, whatever that even means. Again, you are jumping from point to point. You went from
It would never have begun to exist,
to,
and therefore it would have to be beyond time.
and I don't even know how beyond time makes sense as a phrase, let alone how something can be eternal in a timeless void, if you could even describe it as such.
So in other words, Thing Z would have to be an eternal, non-physical, uncaused creator that's responsible for the beginning of all time and all space, and also responsible for everything that did exist, everything that exists now, and everything that will exist in the future.
Said it has to be those things. You haven't proven why it has to be those things. You just say it has to be. Oh, well, it's a thing, so it has to be beyond all things, and it created everything, so it has to be beyond all of the things that it created. And it also has to be a guy, because of course it does, and it also has to have a son, because of course it does. Perhaps I'm being deliberately extra, if you will, but that is genuinely how this kind of message is perceived. And I can't interpret you any more charitably than I already have, because that's genuinely what you sound like
To me.
Accept itself and anything else that might be eternal. Once you open the Pandora's box of saying that God can just be existence, then you have to answer the question of what else could just be existence? Why is God the only thing that gets to just be existence? How do you know there aren't other gods, other things that are eternal, beyond time, beyond space, things like that? For example, if other universes existed, they would be beyond our time and beyond our space, and they would fit the definition that you've provided, yet their existence would very much be not eternal and damageable and things like that. Just existing outside of a spatial temporal framework doesn't make you imperishable.
Does Thing Z sound like someone that you've heard about?
Whether or not Thing Z sounds like someone that I've heard about is irrelevant, because I could have heard wrong. Whether you believe it or not, so could you.
Some people call him God.
Now God has a gender, because of course he does. Why wouldn't he? This is a prime example of exactly what I was complaining about this entire video. He just has a gender. Why does he have a gender? Because
Definitely just happens. If you're struggling with this or you need to help a loved one, please call us on 0800 Stuff Just Happens. Somebody is waiting for your call.
Well, if so, it's important for you to know that he exists.
why is it important? Or in what way is it important that I know he exists? How did you even conclude that he was a he? I cannot make a better meme for Christianity myself if I tried. You are literally just giving him attributes and saying things without any proof or demonstration at all.
But I'll save that for another video. So make sure you subscribe, because wait until you see what else I got coming.
Something tells me I really don't want to see what else you have coming if it's going to be another video of you just saying things. Because you can say all that stuff,
Which is nice and all.
but until you demonstrate that that is in fact the case and the things you said align with reality, explaining the thing we're talking about, you jump to something else. Instead of explaining why it must be eternal, you jump to, therefore nothing can threaten its existence. Instead of explaining why nothing can threaten its existence, you just jump to, well, it's outside of time and space.
Always have and always will. Oh, and wait until you hear about his son.
I mean, come on. God had a son. I mean, time out right there. God had a son? He's powerful beyond all imagination. He exists in a realm above time and space, but he has kids? What is this, Bonanza? He has a son. God had a son, and he said to him, Jesus, I'm sending you down to earth on a suicide mission. But don't worry, they can't kill you because you're really me. But it is going to hurt for a few days. I'm not going to lie about that, son. There's about 3 days you're going to hate me. But I'm doing this for you. I mean me. What am I saying? I'm me, you're you. But I go myself, but I have you. Me. What am I saying? Anyway.
I'm just so tired. I am. I know this probably is going to end up being a long video, but I don't care. I had to get this out. I had to finally plant my feet in the ground and make a big comeback. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the madness as much as I did, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, remember,
I appreciate you.
Lots.